The two big things that are easiest to measure are birth weight and weaning weight, and it's pretty clear, both in gilts and boars. If they're born bigger, they tend to, and they have a heavier weaning weight, they tend to stay in production longer and be more productive. Okay, and so the analogy I use is it doesn't guarantee that's what will happen, but they have the potential to do that. So the analogy I really like to use, since we're here in the Southeast and NASCAR racing is pretty big, it's kind of like you have a race car and then you have the driver, the pit crew, and the gas. So you can think of that early stage in both boars and gilts as probably you're building their reproductive organs or their reproductive machinery. Okay. And so there's lots of data to suggest that late in pregnancy and then right after they're born, there's a lot of important things that happen in the reproductive organs of both the very young gilts and boars. So you kind of build that reproductive machinery early on, but you still have to sort of manage it good throughout the rest of the period and when they're kind of in commercial production. And so that would be sort of like the race car drivers, the pit crew, and the gas. So you can have a really good engine, but if you have a really bad driver or pit crew or gas, you're not going to do well. And the opposite can be true too, is if you don't build a very good engine in a car, you can have the best driver, the best pit crew, and the best gas in the world, but you're still not going to achieve what you want to do.
Swine it. Hi, welcome to today's Swine It podcast. I'm Jerry Purvis, your host, and today we have a very distinguished guest, Dr. Billy Flowers. Dr. Flowers is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor of Animal Science, North Carolina State. And before I let him tell a little bit about himself, just comment that in our parts, Dr. Flowers is a legend. In producers, we have a lot to thank. He's done a lot of work, but we've learned a lot about things that practical applications, particularly in reproductive animals. So without further ado, Dr. Flowers, welcome to our Swine It podcast today.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate being able to visit with everybody today. So a little bit about myself. I always tell people that my grandfather used to say that even some blind hogs find a few acorns every now and then. So I think I found more than my share. But anyway, so I've been here at NC State for 37 years. It's the only job I've ever had. So that means that maybe I'm doing a pretty good job or I'm not employable anywhere else. So you can make that decision, right? But I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about being here in North Carolina, and the reason I took this job was when I interviewed, the industry was really, really progressive, I thought, and they were trying some things that maybe other people didn't try. And they were doing some things that other people said they couldn't do. And it was just kind of a really neat environment to be in. So I really enjoyed my 37 years that I've been here. And so it's been fun. It's been a lot of changes in the industry, right? So when I first started, just to give you an idea, that everybody was breeding sows naturally. We didn't have computerized record keeping systems. People would write things on note cards if they took records at all. And then a lot of the things we knew about nutrition and other things hadn't even been discovered yet. So it's really been fun to watch all the growth and development in all the different areas in that period of time.
A worldwide leader in animal nutrition, Adiceo's portfolio of products includes methionine, the full range of vitamins, enzymes, organic selenium, probiotics, mycotoxin management strategies, and palatability products. With such a diverse offering, Adiceo supports its customers with a broad range of expertise, tools, and services to help them maintain a competitive advantage. Adiceo, fueling predictable profits. To learn more, visit Adiceo at www.adiceo.com.
Yeah, very good. You know, to your point, in my time here, I'll reiterate that there has been a lot of changes. It's amazing over the last 5 years. You know what's been learned here in North Carolina. You know, it's amazing that we're a state that's a corn deficit. We've been able to expand, you know, our production and at one time, you know, greater than Iowa. I don't know if it's that way today, but it's just amazing. And it's just you all the things and technologies we've been able to incorporate to help us maybe compete in a not so pleasant environment with cost structure. But anyway, today, we could, I was thinking back, you've done a lot of great work, and it'd be hard to put in one podcast maybe some of the things you've done, but we're talking about, I guess, more of your recent work here in sow and boar longevity. Could you take a few minutes maybe and just kind of explain some of the work and some what the results you've been able to
give you a little bit of history about why we actually started working in that area. So I go out, part of my job is I'll go out and work with our industry and, spend a lot of time on sow farms and things like that. And, over the years, there were farms that I thought were doing a really good job when they get the gilts in. They would do a really good job of preparing them, giving them boar exposure, things like that. And then they either couldn't get them to show estrus, or they showed a really weak estrus, or when they got them bred, they, maybe didn't have a larger litter and things like that. And so when you see something that you think a group is doing everything really, really well on a commercial farm and things aren't working right, you say, well, is there something we're missing? And so what we did is we actually started going back and kind of looking at the very early stages of a gilt in a boar's life. And so it's interesting is that, one of the great things about my job is that you learn something every day. And then you actually learn something to go, this may be what we should have focused more on, and this could explain that. So that's kind of what we did. So about 10 or 15 years ago, we just decided to go back into multiplication farms, those that raised the future replacement gilts or that would become commercial sows. And we also did the same thing on the male side for boars, although those boars were going to the boar studs now. And we just decided we would measure things that we could. So we measured all kinds of things related to the birth process of the gilt, the litter the gilt was raised in, how well it grew before it was weaned. And then after it was weaned, we kind of measured its growth rate and things like that. And then we actually tracked those gilts through when they were delivered to commercial farms, and then sort of collected information on how long they stayed in production, did they breed back on schedule, and how many total pigs they produced over their lifetime. And then when we have those data sets, and for the boar side, we did the same thing, and then we would just measure if the boars were trained to collect, when they were delivered to the boar stud, and if they did enter production, semen production, how many doses they produced each week and things like that. So when you do things like that, you have your sort of longevity measures, how long they stay in production or how many insemination doses they produce over their lifetime. And then you can look at all these things that were different. We didn't really manipulate everything. We just measured it. So this would normally be what would happen on thing. And what it does is it gives us an idea of what areas contribute the most to the differences we see in the gilts that maybe never get bred and versus those that become six parity sows, and the boars that never produce an insemination dose versus ones that produce lots of insemination doses. And so what we begin to realize, it's kind of a 50-50 proposition. So about half of the variation we see in both the male and the female in terms of their lifetime productivity can be explained by differences that they were exposed to from the time they're born to the time they were weaned. And so I tell my favorite story is it really is, we talk about lifetime productivity or gilt or boar development. It really begins, when they're born, and it probably begins before they're born. So there's a lot of good information now, and some of them that, late in gestation is a very active period where all kinds of organs develop. So the reproductive organs are probably developing as well. And there's some evidence now that maybe even how we treat the sow and the multiplier can affect, the offspring and how they perform anyway. But what we haven't focused on that. There's a lot of other people that are smarter than I am that are working on that part of it. But what we focused on is basically from the time it's born to the time they're weaned. And So again, these are just associations, right? So that's what we do. So what it allows us to do is say, okay, if this is really important, then can we come in and have some strategies to actually increase it, to make it better. So that's kind of what we do. We measure things. We say this actually explains a lot of what we see in adults. So is there something else we can do to make sure it happens for all the gilts or all the boars, not just a few? Okay, so the the two big things that are easiest to measure are birth weight and weaning weight, and it's pretty clear, both in gilts and boars. If they're born bigger, they tend to, and they have a heavier weaning weight, they tend to stay in production longer and be more productive. Okay, and so the analogy I use is it doesn't guarantee that's what will happen, but they have the potential to do that. So the analogy I really like to use, since we're here in the Southeast and NASCAR racing is pretty big. It's kind of like you have a race car and then you have the driver, the pit crew, and the gas. So you can think of that early stage in both boars and gilts as probably you're building their reproductive organs or their reproductive machinery. Okay. And so there's lots of data to suggest that late in pregnancy and then right after they're born, there's a lot of important things that happen in the reproductive organs of both the very young gilts and boars. So you kind of build that reproductive machinery early on, but you still have to sort of manage it good throughout the rest of the period and when they're kind of in commercial production. And so that would be sort of like the race car drivers, the pit crew, and the gas. So you can have a really good engine, but if you have a really bad driver or pit crew or gas, you're not going to do well. And the opposite can be true too, is if you don't build a very good engine in a car, you can have the best driver, the best pit crew, and the best gas in the world, but you're still not going to achieve what you want to do. So it really is kind of we refer to it as a developmental period during that early stage when things are development, and then the functional period, which is after the animal gets delivered to either commercial sow farm or the boar stud, how we manage them then. And it's a 50-50 proposition. At least that's what our data would say right now.
That's an amazing point. We always think about gilt development, particularly more so and after 50 pounds, 25 kilos. And we don't think about, what are the impacts of things we do in that pig's life up to weaning. And so, awesome, being able to put those two things together. And it's very pertinent. Today, gilt's our most expensive animal. We put all this money into this gilt. We hope we select the right gilts, and that's why it's so important, that we pick the animals that are going to, have longevity and are going to give us the most pigs over their lifetime. And that's a very pertinent issue today. We're trying to figure out what are the buttons that we can push, nutritionally, whatever management wise that we can do to get these animals. We're losing, a great percent of those gilts never, make it to parity 3. It takes about 3 parities probably, to pay for ourselves. So very, very, very important.
So it's interesting. So we'll kind of start. And so we've done a little bit of this. Some other people have done a lot more work. Some of the basic studies have been done by a colleague of mine, Skip Bartol at Auburn, and then his collaborator, Carol Bagnell at Rutgers, and then Jeff Fillet, who used to be at the USDA Meat Animal Research Center. He did a lot of the applied work. But so we've always understood that colostrum is important for young pigs. And so it provides passive immunity, and it also basically provides this big jolt of energy when they're first born. So I joke about the kids. I teach classes here on campus, and I tell all our undergraduates and veterinary students that colostrum is like these energy drinks I see them running around with all the time. You take a jolt of that and you're energized. So that's kind of what we think it does for pigs. So in addition to that, colostrum has a lot of factors that have been shown to stimulate different organ developments in different systems. And so it's pretty clear that the replacement boar and replacement gilt, colostrum probably is one of the adequate colostrum intake could probably be one of the most important things they do to set up that development of their reproductive systems at a very early age. And that's been done in a lot of ways. Some of the controlled studies is they had gilts in boars born, and they didn't let them have colostrum, but they fed them like milk replacer. And so the ones that didn't have colostrum had all kinds of problems with their reproductive tract development. So that wouldn't happen normally in a production situation. But then Jeff Fillet came back, and he measured what we call the immunocrit, which you can take a small sample of blood, and it kind of estimates how much immunoglobulins a pig consumed. And if you do that 24 after a pig's born, that's probably a pretty good indication of how much colostrum they got. And so he showed really nice, and this was on large sets of numbers on gilts that were going into commercial production. So then he tracked those gilts in commercial production. And what he showed is that I think if at a certain level, I think it's the immunocrit level was 0.05, and I'm not sure how much that translates to colostrum intake, but I could look it up. Is that if they don't have that at 24 hours, then they tend to be delayed at puberty. When they went to commercial farms, they had trouble finding them in heat. And if they did get them bred, they tended to have fewer number of pigs born alive. And that was only in the first parity, but you would expect it would be later on and stuff. So that in itself is a pretty good piece of evidence that colostrum is really important. So on the boar side, we've done that. We've actually taken boars and we've supplemented, given them with an oral gavage, some additional colostrum that first 24 hours versus not. So these boars were nursing their sows normally. We just gave them more colostrum, right? And so, and then we followed those boars through maturity. We collected the sperm. We're still actually doing that, looking at how many doses they do. And so the boars we gave that supplemental colostrum to, right now, they have about 30 to 40% boar sperm, and I think they're almost 2 years old now, and their ejaculates and the one that didn't. So don't get me wrong, the ones that got colostrum aren't bad boars, right? They're producing plenty of insemination doses. We were just able to increase that a whole lot higher by giving them more colostrum and stuff. So that's a more controlled study, right? You had boars in the same litter nursing the same sow, and we just gave some of them an additional colostrum at first. So I think, we always focus on making sure that all our piglets get colostrum, right? But that may actually be more important, especially for replacement gilts on multiplication farms, and maybe, boars on multiplication farms are going on the terminal side and stuff. And so you don't need to dose them, but there can be some things, just some simple management. A lot of these critical care programs that I see implemented really well on commercial farms, how they treat the pigs when they're first born. That can be really important. Maybe that can think about that as making that a requirement for multiplication farms. And so then once you get past colostrum, then there is a pretty good correlation between weaning weight and longevity also in both boars and gilts. And so anything you can do after they get colostrum to allow those animals to actually gain more weight, chances are you increase the odds that they're going to have really good reproductive organ development. And then when they get to the point where you're going to introduce them into their commercial situation, they'll be more productive. So lots of things there. The nutritionists, I think they want to tar and feather me when I bring it up. But, some type of supplemental feeding system for maybe those gilts that fall behind on multiplier farms. What the studies we've done, and it works well. We did this in a commercial system. Actually, we did it in the Goldsboro system, and they were still producing years ago. But we went into a multiplication farm and just took away those maternal line barrows because they don't have much value. So they foster them over to other sows. So we reduced the number of pigs nursing in that litter for all those replacement gilts. And they had, as you'd expect, they had greater pre-weaning gains, heavier weaning weights, and they stayed in production longer and stuff like that. And so it's a good point. I think you brought it up earlier. The job of the multiplication farm for that sow is you want every gilt that sow produces to become a functional, productive commercial sow in somebody's commercial farm, right? And so we probably, that's the goal, right? And most of the multiplication farms, probably get paid on a bonus, or a lot of them do, on like how many of those gilts they deliver out the door to be developed into. So there's some. Maybe we don't have to do it to all the ones. Maybe there's a birth weight, above which we say these pigs are going to be fine, right? But maybe it's the ones in a medium or a light birth weight range. Maybe they're the only ones that need supplemental type of nutritional assistance, if you will, and things like that. So I think there's we're talking about it earlier. I think one of the things that's I've always been impressed with about our industry here and in the U.S. as well, if we figure out something we think works, and I'll put in quotation mark thinks, because we don't really know if something works until we take it to the industry and the industry adopts it, right? But if we figure out we think something works and it has enough value, there's going to be somebody out there that figures out, yeah, this is the way it works and this is the way to do it. And then it kind of takes off, right? So it may look different on different farms, but if there's enough value in it, the industry will figure out how to implement it if it's cost effective anyway. So, but you made a good point about gilts, right? So you have all this investment in replacement gilt. And then I tell students, if she doesn't get bred or enter production, it's like buying a brand new car, signing that loan agreement and having all those payments. And then like 100 yards down the road, you total it, right? So you're still paying for that car, but you're never going to get any payback on it, right? And so it's the same way with gilts, And so if there's a way we can identify the ones that maybe don't have much potential, both on birth weight or weaning weight, get them out, don't invest any more money into them, and then really work with the ones that do to try to enhance what they do. I think in the future, that could be, a livable strategy for a lot of people. What I hope to do, and we're looking at this, but it's sometimes it's kind of looking for a needle in the haystack. So I mentioned these things in colostrum that stimulate reproductive tract development. So if there's one compound or one growth factor or one of those things we can identify that does most of that, right? Then we just give it to everything at processing, right? So we can identify one of those things we can just give to the young animal. It stimulates their reproductive tract development. And then when we process them, we give them their iron shots. We just give them a dose of that, and then hopefully that'll work. But we're not there yet. But that would be kind of the long range goal, I think, right? That would be the easiest thing to do if it's cost effective and things.
Yeah, you kind of answered my next question was going to be: do you think it's more colostrum yield, or it's something in the quality of that colostrum?
It's both. It's both. So I think there's something in there. But the more colostrum they get, the better off they are. So I think for these things, usually the more the better. And there's something in there. And then we know a little bit about, we know a little bit more about colostrum. I think everybody knows this, but, piglets that usually nurse on the front 2 or 3 pairs, they always do better because they have more milk and it's probably better colostrum versus those that nurse on the sort of the latter 2 or the posterior 3 or pairs of nipples and stuff. So, there is some biological variation in all sows. Milk quality and milk quantity and colostrum quantity and colostrum quality and stuff like that. So I think for colostrum, for like at least a future replacement gilt or boar, I think there's lots of evidence that the more you can get, the better off you're going to be and stuff.
Yeah, we've always... Our multiplier farms, invariably, we almost always keep the same protocols as we do commercial farms. And so that's it gives us an opportunity to maybe implement something that we can make an impact that, requires probably very little investment when you're talking about a weaned pig, if it's a little supplement or whatever. So that makes a lot of sense. And we got 50% of it, and we can, take care of within 3 weeks or so.
Yeah. And so, that's, so I tell people that's where we are now. And I think, is we go back, and maybe if we go back and look at even further, late in gestation, because for most animals, that late gestation period, that could also be an opportunity to improve a lot of things for a lot of our sows and pigs. So there's a lot of people working on late gestational feeding. And the shift that I've seen, and it's even going back earlier, but the shifts I've seen is maybe going away from like bump feeding or something like that to going to targeted increase in certain nutrients that may actually stimulate the development of different organs. And there's probably some that stimulate the development of the reproductive organs. So I could envision a program maybe in 10 or 15 years where you had a special diet the last couple of weeks for your multiplication sows in late gestation, right? And they're born. They get plenty of colostrum, but just to make sure in case they didn't, you kind of dose them with something that would stimulate their reproductive tract development. And then after that, you would hopefully have a system where they'd have access to plenty of like mature milk from the sow through the rest of lactation and stuff like that. So, I mean, you kind of have to think about those things in the big picture, but I do think, I've often, I grew up, I was the run of the litter. So my family always had me do all the strange things or the things, but I grew up having to get my uncle had a dairy, and so I had to get up and get the cows up in the morning and stuff. And but the one thing that I learned from the dairy industry, they wean their replacement heifers at birth, and they really have gotten colostrum management for those animals kind of fine-tuned, right? They collect colostrum, they know the quality of it, they give them a certain dose, and then they develop them on and stuff like that. And so as a result, we have really productive dairy cows and things like that. So I think, sometimes I've kind of been looking at and talking to my colleagues here that work with the dairy industry. And so I think the swine industry could learn a lot about colostrum management for replacement females anyway from the dairy industry and what they do. So they know they wean at birth out of necessity, right? Because of they're selling the milk and everything like that. But they do a pretty decent job, and they can freeze it and thaw it and dose it, or they can collect it and give it fresh, and they're in a little bit different system than we are, right? But so there's something with it, I think there's some things maybe that at least I can learn, from the dairy industry and what they've done and see if it has any sort of real application for the swine industry and stuff like that in terms of colostrum management and stuff. So.
You made a good point on that last, trimester gestation being an opportunity. And I think we get caught up as nutritionists, looking at birth weight. And we really have found a lot of things that we really have made an impact significantly with birth weights. But to your point, if we're, and that's the next question, is there something in utero maybe that we could do, other implementations that possibly you think might impact that animal's reproductive capacity going in the future?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The litter-bearing species like the pig, it's in terms of birth weight and fetal development throughout all of gestation. It's one of the more challenging physiological sort of enigmas that we have to deal with litter-bearing species, right? Because the uterus basically has finite uterine space. And then what we've essentially done with our really highly prolific sows is some of them going to have 14, 15, 16, 18, 20 pigs. And so we've increased kind of litter size, without maybe increasing the same sort of uterine function or capacity and stuff. So then what happens is we get a larger litter with smaller pigs. And that's just a function of supply and demand and stuff. And I think, that from genetic selection that we've made progress in that area because birth weights are creeping up. But the interesting thing is the way I look at it in the simplest view is the placenta, the area that each individual piglet's placenta occupies probably dictates how big that pig's going to get. So if a pig has a large placental area and gets kind of attached early, and we think anyway, placentation or attachment starts somewhere around the second week after they're bred, and it probably is finished somewhere around 30 or 35 days. So that first month, basically piglets have kind of lined up where they are in the uterus. The placenta's got its space, and some of them have lots of space, some of them have little space, and then it just kind of gets amplified from there, right? So I do think, in terms of there's some things that I know there's groups at Texas A&M, and we've got a faculty member here. They're more basic scientists, but they're doing really good work in looking at, are there things we can feed sows early in pregnancy that help stimulate sort of angiogenesis? That's the development of blood vessels in the uterus that kind of acts so there's actually sort of more efficient, if you will, uterine space when the sort of implantation starts and begins. And so if you have more blood vessels per square inch, right, then you should be able to get more nutrients through the, nutrient transfer across the placenta to the fetus. And then you could actually kind of hopefully have more even or bigger birth weight. So that's kind of the thing, right? It's a two-tiered problem. You want to get the nutrients there. So you can do that by probably feeding the sow, but you still have to have the pathway for those nutrients to get to the fetus. And that's really through the placental surface area. It leaves the uterine circulation and enters the fetal circulation, eventually gets to so there's, if you look, people will begin to look at different types of amino acids, different types of growth factors and things like that. And there's lots of things that show promise, right? The key is, I think, and this may take more than a few years, is to figure out if there's a correct sequence or combination or when and things like that. And then it's really interesting. One of my real good friends from Virginia Tech, we were actually undergraduates together, is Mark Estienne. So, he's done really good work at Virginia Tech and stuff. And he was probably one of the first ones to actually look at, and this was actually before the industry started moving from gestation crates to gestation pens. But he did a really nice study there at his research station in what we called South Side of Virginia, where he looked at the offspring from sows that gestated in pens versus sows that gestated in crates. Totally. And then he also did what we kind of do now. He had sows gestate for about 30 or 40 days in crates and then move them into pens. And so there's differences in how those gilts, once they're born, and once they were born, they kind of raised them all the same and stuff. But those gilts had differences in terms of like age at puberty and ovulation rate and stuff like that. And so they were fed the same environment. They were fed the same feed. He did everything. And so, some of the housing stuff that we look at, that probably needs to be reinvestigated a little bit in terms of, maybe there's some things that, we should or shouldn't be doing in terms of housing, or there are things that maybe we could do in housing that kind of make that offspring sort of more developmentally competent, if you want to. In the human world, they refer to it as epigenetic effects, right? So there are things that program, and so every time you look at any magazine or listen to any health show about the human, they're always talking about epigenetic effects and how during pregnancy, if you do this or do that, it could affect your offspring and then maybe their offspring and stuff. Well, that's probably true for pigs, and I think the data's out there to suggest that a lot of the things we do may have an impact, good or bad, and stuff. So that's something to. Then we talked about it a little bit and over the years, but in the South here in the Southeast, heat stress on sows is not good. So even if the sow survives and you have really good ventilation and stuff like that, they're probably going to get hot here if they gestate through the summer, right? And so then there's a lot of good work coming out. This was actually done. I guess there was folks at Iowa State and Missouri, and then one of my former PhD students, Kara Stewart, who was at Purdue, did some of this. But sows that get heat stressed in late gestation, or I think the Missouri work said just about any time during gestation, their offspring, aren't as reproductively competent as ones that don't. Okay. So maybe in the South, maybe we have to take that in consideration, right? Maybe we don't use those animals as replacement animals that gestate during August or something if it gets really hot. Or maybe there's a way we need to monitor barn or animal temperature. And if it gets too high, saying, yeah, these animals aren't really necessarily going to be the most productive over their life and stuff. And so the challenge is, like we talked about earlier, you wouldn't know that. They may, we don't know what happens, but they may come into heat the first parity and be fine, and we may not see those long-term effects till later and stuff. So there's lots of things I think to think about in that regard as well. So.
Here in North Carolina as well, sometimes I think we think we're the only region that suffers from heat stress, but they've had some really tough heat in the Midwest this year, and it's you really turned on a lot of your work here with heat stress. I think is had people pause a little bit and think about what are we doing and how can we mitigate heat, and even we always think about it in the farrowing house. We know
sure.
if it's hotter above that animal's temperature, she's going to eat less, and all the negative connotations there. But we don't think about our gestating breeding barns. Maybe we're affecting litter size, and don't even realize it. So it's kind of a silent killer sometimes, and here we suffer. It seems like heat is. I know we mentioned before. Heat is probably more impactful than even PERS. It's somebody deep home. So I think it's a very economic issue, economical important issue for us, particularly in the industry in general. But go ahead.
Yeah. So the other thing, just when you were mentioning that, I was thinking about the folks, it's Jay Johnston and Lance Baumgartner and Jason Ross there at Purdue and Iowa State, and then Tim Safransky at Missouri, and then Kara Stewart. She was at Purdue, but they've done all this work. But one of the things that really stood out in their work for me is that the offspring from sows that were experienced heat stress are actually less tolerant of heat as adults. So think about that. So a sow, most animals have homeostatic mechanisms where it gets hot, they have to cool themselves down. And if they do a pretty good job, they can have a reasonably normal litter and reproduce fine. But this is, in addition, they'd actually looked, they exposed them to different temperatures and saw how quickly they recovered or didn't recover. So I think this is right. And if I'm not, I'm sure one of them will email or call you and tell them I'm wrong, which is fine. But I think it was that when those sows were exposed to heat in gestation, their offspring had a reduced ability to adjust to high temperatures when they were adults, right? So you're programming them to be less heat sort of tolerant and more heat susceptible and things like that. So it is it's we don't think about it, and then the other thing is, we think about heat stress as really, really hot days for a short period of time. But, gestation is 114 days. And so if you have moderate heat stress over a long period of time, that could actually have the same effect as a really hot spell for a week. We just don't know, right? And so it's one of those things. So.
Yeah, I was talking, I tell people, one of the issues we had the growth in the industry back in North Carolina back in the 80s, and we built barns, and it'd been nice to know the body of knowledge that we have today, and we could go back and rebuild those barns, because we got barns for animals that are today greatly genetically superior. We got more pigs, but we've got the same footprint. We got the same barn. We're feeding animals the same. If we could go back, we would probably have 2 lines in the gestation barn. It'd just be nice to know. And I think, today that's a question, we struggle to maybe, to your point, we got a race car, but we're not getting everything out of it, because we just don't have the barns. We don't have the system to really fully, take advantage of some of the information and knowledge that we built. So I think going forward, that's going to be some tough questions as producers. Is we keep these old barns where we know there's things that we could do that we could impact if we had different systems, feeding systems. So
yes. So that to that point, I'll tell you is so talking about something entirely different, but I'm confident that the industry will do it right.
Yeah.
So like when I first started here back in the mid '80s, everyone was breeding naturally, and the barns were set up for natural mating, and stuff like that. And then it's almost like when the industry shifted to a carcass merit buying system, AI really took off. But the guys figured it out. A lot of the guys here and other places I visited across the country, in other countries, they figured it out. They took a barn like the old, probably you and I are the only ones who remember this, but the old Lubbock style breeding barns, right? Where we backed them out. The boars were behind, we backed them out and you bred. And then you had one sow each week, for the boars. And then you move the boars down. Well, they figured it out. They used those barns and converted them to barns for AI and stuff. And so they made use of that space. So I'm convinced that if we get the information out there for the people that are working on the farms and stuff, they can figure out how to do it and stuff. But, that is, it's a good point. It's kind of interesting. I think about this, on an entirely different subject, right? But when most of our finishing barns were built here in North Carolina for the guys that are finishing out pigs, that was in the 90s, right? And so if you looked at our average number weaned back then, it was maybe 9 or 10 pigs. And so now we have the same finishing space, right? Because we haven't built any more finishing barns, but we're weaning like 12 pigs. So we have a 20% increase in pigs that have to flow through the system, that wasn't really built for that, right? And so then the other thing is we've taken them to heavier market weights, right? Yeah. So it is, to your point, there are going to have to be some readjustments or things like that on one side or the other, because we have made a better sow, more productive sow. And then when we built our production systems, our sow farms, our nurseries, and our finishers, it was based on a certain level of performance, and we've exceeded that. Plus, we've gone to heavier weights because the genetics have gotten better, because we can take them to 300 pounds. And we were talking about it this week just to show you the change that we had. So I was going through some of my files for the senior level class. And so when I came here in the mid 80s, if you sold a 230 pound pig, you would get docked for it being too heavy. Right? So the packers didn't want a 230 pound pig. Yeah. And now if you try to sell them a 230 pound pig, they won't take it because it's too light, Yep. And that 230 pound pig may have had like an inch, maybe 1.2 inches of back fat. And now that 300 pound pig barely has a half inch of back fat. So that just, and you think about it, in 30 years or 37 years, that's a remarkable transformation of the animal and what the industry's done and stuff. So.
Yeah, I can remember when 240, that was our target.
Yeah.
240, and now it's, like I said, 290, and who knows with genetics where we'll get to going there. But I had a question, and you're very you have a lot of humility, but I want you to put that down for a minute. What do you think over your career maybe is your biggest, you feel like biggest impact? And it maybe it's on students that, they're the technology.
Yeah, I would say, I think I would have to say, I think it's maybe the people I've helped get interested in working with pigs. And so, it's interesting. If I took a snapshot of our class in the mid 1980s, where the students came from, the male to female ratio, what they wanted to do, why they entered animal science, and then take a snapshot of it now, it's entirely different. So, and that's not good. That's not bad. Don't get me wrong. So when I first started, I had lots of kids, lots of students that came from a farm, wanted to go back to a farm. had a fair number that wanted to be vets, but they were thinking about other things as well. Now, most of our students are what we call urban or rural non-farm. Most of them want to be a veterinarian. A lot of them never seen a pig except on a picture, never handled a pig or things like that. So I think I always look at it as an opportunity. The kids today are really bright. They're more worldly than I was at their age. I mean, I got all my information from an AM radio, probably like you did. And we're lucky to have like 2 television channels and stuff, and there was no internet, no cell phones or computers. So I was oblivious to what was going on around the world. And the kids today are really in tune to things like that. So they're very bright and stuff like that. And so I think, getting them interested in animals first, and then agricultural second, and then watching the ones that go on to do things. So I'll brag on him. He'll probably tell you, but so Dr. Allman and I, one of the things we did early on is we kind of, along with Carm Parkhurst in poultry science, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, and then John Barnes at the vet school. We created or started what we call our Food Animal Scholars Program here at NC State, right? And it was in response to the swine and the poultry industry needing veterinarians to actually focus on providing expertise for the poultry and the swine industry. So it was originally called the Swine and Poultry Scholars Program. We picked one student, one swine person and one poultry person, early in their undergraduate career, and they were promised sort of admission into vet school if they met the minimum requirements later and stuff. And so that program under Jim Floyd was the department head for a while at the vet school, and he saw the value in that program, and he's kind of, under his leadership, it kind of grew from 2 students to now we have 6 that we pick and then 2 alternates. And all the alternates have gotten in, so I tell people it's really 8, right? And so the kids that go onto that program and have really done remarkable things never would have really thought about, being a swine vet. And I could list them. And if I start listing them, they're going to get mad at me because I'm going to forget somebody. I'm not going to list them and stuff. But Glenn and I were talking about it the other day, and I think a lot of the major sort of swine producing areas, like Iowa, Minnesota, and Texas, and North Carolina, even overseas a lot for companies and stuff. We've got a couple that work for the government, have all come through that program. And so they all started out as undergraduates, right? And there was maybe one, I think, that really had an interest for poultry or swine. And then we got them into this program. They got to do some things, and then they've really done nice things and stuff. And so I think that's important. And I would say here, we're really fortunate. We have a really good working relationship with you folks out in the industry. They let us bring students to commercial farms. And then our university has made the decision that we're going to have our research and teaching farms, and we're going to keep them open. So I tell our kids, our swine educational unit is south of town off Lake Wheeler Road. At the end of the road that our swine and dairy unit are off of, there's a gated community with $1.5 million homes, right? But they love having swine and dairy farms right in front of them because they know it's not going to be developed. We manage stuff responsibly. They love it and stuff. And so I think it's actually, I would say, probably the students and trying to get students interested in agriculture and just selfishly for our industry interested in pigs and swine production and stuff. I've always told people, if you give me a student long enough and I can be out at the swine farm where there's sows and baby pigs, I can probably convert them. I won't tell you who they are, but there are a couple of swine veterinarians that started out as what we call equine enthusiasts, and I converted them. So if I can convert equine enthusiasts into swine vets, then that's pretty good, right? But it's not just me. It's, it's the whole effort of, we have support from the industry. We have support from the National Pork Board and the North Carolina Pork Council, and then from the department, and the university as well, to make sure we maintain these laboratories and teaching facilities and stuff. So.
Yeah, just thinking, as great as the work you've done, the research, Yeah, if you think about it, it probably is. You've got somebody that's come through this program in just about all areas of production, all areas of the country and regions, and key decision makers. So it must be. I think NC State. Of course, I'm biased. You're biased, but I think we got a good program. We got farms. We got the industry. They're all close here in proximity. And then even the feed mill, we've got
that's right. Exactly.
We have a feed mill that can make, custom feeds and can look at different things. So it's just an amazing area and program, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Like Adam Fahrenholtz and the guys in poultry science that run the feed mill are really good. And so, he started to that point. He started like the feed mill management sort of minor and certificate. And so like I have graduate students and undergraduates that, I really, even if they're not going to do anything with a feed mill, I kind of have them go through that because they see what's involved because, feed's such an important part of all our agricultural industry and stuff. And, who would have thought, right? Like you mentioned it earlier, who would have thought in a grain deficit state, we could develop a feed mill? But I mean, let me tell you, that feed mill is busy. Like if you want feed made for you, you better get in line, because they're busy and they do a really good job and they teach the kids. And it's really a working and teaching feed mill. The students that go through that program and work there, they do everything that they're going to do if they decide to go into the feed mill and industry, as a full-time career and stuff. So.
Yeah, I think it's so important as nutritionists, fellow nutritionists from other areas. You talk to them; sometimes they don't have the background in the feed that you think, the manufacturing of feed that you think they would, and even vets. Vets that come through the program that take vet, female classes. They have at least some kind of perspective and understanding of how that process works, and so I think it's a good.
The thing that I really, we have the students kind of in one of the classes kind of go out there and watch them make the swine feed that they're going to deliver to our swine unit. And then we have them take samples and send it into our feed analysis lab at NCDA and then just kind of look at it. But I think it really hit home, when the students saw how they screen the raw ingredients that go in. And so like when we were there, they actually rejected a load of corn because it didn't meet their specs or things like that. So even if you don't go work in the swine industry and stuff, but you saw that, you could say, yeah, they're worried, they're worried about quality for the animals and also for whatever product that we're going to sell that people might consume. Or the pigs that produce the product that ate that feed, and things like that. So there's a lot of monitoring and regulation. I think that people don't realize, like if they just come to the swine farm for a tour, they just see feed there, right? They say, oh, they keep it in a bin, but they don't realize all the science and the screening that went in before it got to that bin, right? So that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, our time's coming pretty near here, and just want as a producer here in North Carolina, fellow North Carolinian, I want to say I appreciate the work you're doing. It's made a big impact. I can think about all the very practical things that you can take that research and just take it out on your farm and make an impact. So I really like applied, research and that's what you've given us, being able to understand what's going on and maybe identify some of the factors, as we talk about semen quality and, where in the process are we making a mistake? It's tough sometimes. You got so many areas and so many factors. So appreciate all the work.
It's time for our famous 3. Feed flow is changing the way the swine industry sees feed. As the world's only on-pipe feed sensor, feed flow tells you exactly how much feed is being delivered to your animals, so you can be sure that every pig in your barn is well fed and growing. With industry-leading precision and up-to-the-minute real-time data and alerts, feed flow is a simple and affordable way to improve production outcomes across your organization. Feed is too expensive to ignore. Try feed flow today.
At the end, we always ask 3 questions. First question, what would be your favorite resource book? Doesn't have to be about pigs. It could be about anything. What would you say is your favorite?
I've learned more about life in general, and I've learned more about my job by going out and visiting with producers. So producers are all my favorite resource. So they're even if it's not about pigs, it's really kind of interesting because there's a lot of wisdom out there. I think about life in general, especially with, what our country's gone through with the pandemic and things like that, some of the folks that have been in business for a long time here in agriculture and other places, agriculture is an industry where you have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, but everybody kind of manages to not get too worked up over the highs and not to worry about much of the lows, and they just keep on and doing things like that. So it'd have to be producers I've worked with.
Yeah, that's a good point. I go out to a walk through barns, and it's the people on the front line that really
exactly
it really gets you excited. You leave there because you understand that they care about what they're doing, and they're there to do, for the most part, they're there to do a great job, and they want to hear and they want to listen, they want to improve. But it just brightens them. They're excited every day. They wake up, they go to the farm, they're ready to, they really love what they do. So it really kind of energizes your battery, so to speak, when you're able to visit that. How about maybe the biggest influence on your career? It would be,
it's like most people. It's probably my family. So my family was really supportive. My favorite story is my parents gave me money to buy a high school class ring, and I bought 2 bread gilts instead. and so I kept for about a month afterward, I walked around the house, with my hands in my pocket, and then and I was scared to death, and then when I told them, and they said, yeah, it's okay. And then, both my dad, he gave me some good advice. So it was pretty clear I wasn't going to be able to go home and farm for a lot of reasons. And he said, well, if you don't want to go home and farm and you really want to make a contribution, you need to go out and learn the most you can about something you're interested in and then help other people, with their problems addressing it. And so I've tried to do that and stuff. So I'd have to say it's my family and stuff. So,
very good.
Yeah, and my wife and my family now, they've been it's like anybody else. You can't do anything by yourself. Right? So,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're only as good as our support.
That's right.
Supporting group. Lastly, what do you think are some traits or characteristics that you find with successful people in our industry? What are some of the?
So I think so in the swine industry, I've really been. I think most of the people listen first, and then they act later. The other thing I think is, and this is probably really true, they understand how to take disappointment, either or bad times, and then kind of turn them into good times. So another way of doing it is they learn how to deal with, I won't call it a failure, but like disappointments and something didn't happen or something didn't turn right. And sometimes those things happen because of things we do. And sometimes it happens because of things that are entirely out of our control. But in the end of the day, people learn how to turn that into a positive thing. They learn how to deal with disappointment and things like that. And so that's something that, at least, being teaching here for 37 years, that's something that, and I'm probably going to get in trouble, but that's something that the younger generation that I teach the students isn't as good about the older generation. It's like, you don't have to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but you need to learn from your mistakes. I always tell students, I learn a lot more from things that didn't work out than things that I worked out, right? You learn a lot more from your mistakes, your disappointments, and your successes. And so I think that kind of what I see in lots of areas, especially in agriculture, those are the people that really get. See, I think if anybody were to pick, anybody that's a leader in any realm of agriculture, whether it be in production or research or government or anything like that. And they'll tell you, yeah, I did this and that was really stupid, but I learned more from that and I never did it again, or I knew what not to do in the future and stuff. So you have to learn. You can't be afraid to make mistakes, but when you do, you can't dwell on it. You just got to learn from it and go on and stuff.
That's a good point. I think our industry is resilient. We as you said, it's cyclical sometimes. The market's good, the market's bad, and we definitely are not afraid to try something. And if I find out it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. I always tell people I'll try to learn from my own mistakes, but it's even better if you can learn from others' mistakes.
That's right. You don't wish mistakes on anybody, but like if somebody else made it first and then you don't do it, then you learn something. Exactly. And you owe them a big favor, right? You really do. So
exactly, yeah. And like to your point, as you may know, as you know very well, you go and research, you got, hypothesis and you think something, and it turns out totally opposite and you think it's a failure, but in actuality, you learn something and the industry learns something. And so we learned just as much from that failure as we did from something that, turned out to be true.
That's exactly true. Yep.
So, well, very good. Well, Dr. Flowers, I appreciate your time today, and maybe we can have you. We could go on. We could have 10 more podcasts and still not cover all of the work you've done. And so, definitely look forward to maybe getting you on another podcast going forward and picking your brain on some other topics as well.
All right, thanks, Jerry. No problem. I really enjoy it. So.